Hello, everyone. I'm super pleased to have a very special guest with us today, Eric Ries of Lean Startup fame. And Eric, we're honored to have you here addressing the Deploy attendees today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Eric, as you all know, is the founder of the famous methodology that I'm sure all of us have used, the Lean Startup. So let's hear from the man himself on what is the Lean Startup all about, Eric, and how did you come about with this idea 15 years ago?
Yeah, it's been a few years now. Yeah, the Lean Startup was published in 2011, if you can believe it, and I had been writing and blogging about it for a few years before that. So it really has been quite a journey. So the fundamental idea of the Lean Startup is actually very simple. It's just that a startup is an experiment. Whether we admit it or not, whether we wrote a really awesome, elaborate business plan or not, whatever we think is going to happen, we fundamentally don't know. And it doesn't mean that therefore we just throw stuff at the wall to see what sticks. We use the scientific method. We develop a hypothesis about what we think is going to happen, and then we rapidly and efficiently test to find out. And when, of course, if something goes wrong, we give ourselves the opportunity to pivot rather than having the company go out of business. And it came partly out of my own experiences. I mean, I've had several failed startups before I had any kind of success. And in those failures, what drove me crazy was I was really a stickler for like using management best practices. I thought I was doing everything the best way because I was copying what bigger companies, do in their management practices. And what I didn't understand was that the management challenges of a startup are fundamentally different from an established company because we don't have an established operating history from which to make predictions about what's supposed to happen. So when you're building a new product, new customers, new business model, new supply chain, when it's new, you're the source of the uncertainty yourself. And so you can't use traditional management methods that are based on forecasting and planning. And so there's obviously a lot of technique to it, but that's the idea of Lean Startup, and that's where it came from.
Oh, that's fantastic. And um, I used Lean Startup when I was an entrepreneur, and this was right when you were publishing your blog. So
Mhm.
it was true then, and I think it is true now. But I'm sure, as the author of this concept and framework, you probably noticed how the world has changed in the last 15 years, right?
Of course.
Where you and I were joking a little while ago that the startup constraints remain, but what the constraints are have evolved quite a bit over the last 15 years, right? 20 years ago, constraints were finding servers and finding money to buy Oracle database. And
Mhm.
now, in a very weird, ironic twist, servers and GPUs have become the constraint again, and where most of your fundraising is going. But from a lean startup methodology perspective, how has it evolved over the last 15 years?
Well, I'll tell you what's changed and what stayed the same. But what stayed the same is that the industry is still cyclical. And every few years we go through a mania and then a bust. And one of the things I've learned since becoming the lean startup guy is you can time the top of the mania by whenever people write these repeated articles talking about how such and such company proves that you don't need lean startup anymore. And it's always some company that, raised way, way too much money. And I think the last one I saw was like Quibi or someone like that, who's now now dearly departed. Because of course, for a startup, being overfunded is just as bad as being underfunded. So that's the same. People, the same arguments people have about whether you should have a vision or build an MVP, whether a pivot is an abdication or whether it's a necessary part on the path to perfection. Those are kind of eternal debates that we've been having this whole time, and I think people like to debate that stuff in the abstract, and every once in a while you'll find a founder who feels like they had success by breaking those rules. But on the whole, most entrepreneurs that I talk to, found it helpful to have a framework, a conceptual vocabulary for reasoning about these startup ideas. In fact, even the many of the founders who don't agree still found the framework helpful to form their own ideas. And to me, that's like really, when we say that lean startup is fundamentally a scientific revolution, what we mean is that it's really about what works. We don't want it to become a stale dogma and ideology. It's about helping entrepreneurs clarify their own thinking about the management challenges that they face. What has changed, though, is the economic reality of building a startup. Karl Marx famously said that power accrues to those who have the ownership of the means of production. But we live in an era where you can rent the means of production. It's such a strange thing in the history of the world that with a credit card, even this was in the advent of cloud. I remember talking to people about the fact that you could rent more computational power than were available to our ancestors in the dark, dark ages of 25 years ago. Not even that long ago. All of a sudden, now this computational power is available to all of us. And with this new AI revolution that's going on now, this is on absolute steroids. I mean, it's just the level of individual agency that is possible thanks to these tools, to the new clouds, to the fact that inference and compute is for free, open source LLM models. I could go on. So many incredible things. And honestly, just the basic fact that for $20 a month, anyone on the planet can just rent access to ChatGPT or Anthropic Claude, state of the art models that even state government, state actors didn't have even a few years ago. It's a remarkable thing. And so when the economic reality changes, it doesn't change the fundamental techniques of lean startup. What it does is it compresses the cycle time. Everything gets faster because you could simply afford to do more experiments per unit time, but also the competitive pressure is much higher because more and more and more people have democratic access to the means of production and therefore can do more experimentation. So it's a net positive for the industry. Of course, I think we need a lot more entrepreneurship in this world, but as a practitioner, we have to update our tactics for the new reality. So just to give you one very simple example, I remember in one startup that I was involved in early in my career, we went 5 years before we launched a product. And in the next startup I did after that, I famously wrote about this in the book, we launched our MVP in 6 months. From that time era, from that perspective, that's a 10x improvement in speed to go from 60 months to 6 months. We're really proud of ourselves. But now, I meet entrepreneurs who look at me like you wasted 6 months before finding out if customers wanted to use your product. So the time compression, there are products now that are more sophisticated than what I wrote in those 6 months that can be launched in 6 weeks. You look at, I'll give you, there's so many examples. So it's not to say that speed in absolute terms is always right. Of course, I work with companies that are working on really generational projects, stock exchanges and rocket ships and, nuclear power and stuff. So not everything can be done in a day. But no matter what industry you're in, the eternal truth is that the relative speed of learning is always a competitive advantage. And so if you have the learning advantage, if you have the speed advantage, you ultimately have the ability to win.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think it is. It's really remarkable that you talk about speed as a competitive differentiator, and it can be a durable advantage based on how quickly you can learn. Speed, not for the sake of speed itself, but speed means you are actually improving your product or service
Yes.
faster than your competition. So I think that is really important. You also talked about the compression of cycle times. Is there also a compression of capital or both dollars as well as human capital required? We have started seeing a lot of people predict that there'll be a single person unicorn that is going to be born with AI. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how does a lean startup? So let me frame this question this way, Eric. Do you think a lean principle works for super tiny teams? And also, does it work for new initiatives in bigger companies as well?
Well, let's take the answers one at a time. This is a good, really good question. A lot of rich material to work with. So the first thing is, have we seen a compression in the ease of getting started? Absolutely. And I would say there's actually 3 dimensions to that change, each of which is as significant as the other. And sometimes one or more are really underappreciated. So the first is what I call the activation energy. How difficult is it to get started with a new company, new product, new idea? And that has come in many, and that's of course industry specific, but in almost every industry, in many industries, that time has totally collapsed. From new software products, but also to new beverages and consumer packaged goods. Thinks about the explosion of products that are available, from Instagram influencers, and I could tell you lots and lots of stories in the energy sector, even in healthcare and traditionally slow sectors. We're starting to see whole new ways that products can be built in record time, and with and of course, when we say time, we really mean the combination of time, money, and human capital that's necessary to get started. So that's activation. The second question is capability. The AI revolution is not just about activation energy, it's also just about the capability. How good is the MVP you can build in that short time? How capable of it? How quickly can it be? Can it replicate existing features? What new things that no one's ever tried before can you try? So the capability of these platforms is increasing, and so the power that a small team can wield is much greater. And the third one is scalability. I don't think this is nearly appreciated enough.
Mm.
Many of the things that people attribute to cloud and say, okay, cloud helps you get started faster. It makes it cheaper to get started. That's true, but it's not that dramatic. I mean, after all, racking one server was not that hard. Okay, yes, it wasn't as easy as getting on cloud, but like I did it. I remember starting a company in 2004, and I went out and bought a physical server, and I took it to the office and I plugged it in, and I stayed up all night. I installed Linux, and I got I built my development environment from scratch, from source code, on Debian myself by hand. It was a pain. I didn't enjoy doing it. I would much rather spend 5 minutes on AWS, but or DigitalOcean or any product where I can go faster. But okay, so a week after I bought the server, I was in business. I could build software. What's different is the intrinsic scalability of these platforms.
Mhm.
If I start a DigitalOcean application today, even if I'm doing something very complicated with a lot of GPU power compute, I don't have to necessarily migrate that architecture anywhere else as I scale. And therefore, I don't have to worry about any of the manufacturing or supply chain dimensions of scalability. It's automatically built into the architecture of the product from the beginning. When you combine the lowering of the activation energy, the much greater capability of the MVPs that we can build, and the intrinsic scalability that cloud platforms provide, we're talking about a very potent combination for entrepreneurship.
Great. That's wonderful. Yeah, I think it is. We try to use lean concepts at DigitalOcean and in my previous employers as well. I mean, we are like at $1 billion scale. I think the beauty of the lean startup is the innovating on behalf of customers and the discipline it forces the startup initiative, even within bigger companies, to
Yeah.
be disciplined around knowing exactly what your customers want and validating that and building a system to keep that continuous loop of validation. I think is super, super powerful and very helpful. And I think as we go into this new era, I think it is going to be even more important. So we talked a little bit about GPUs and AI, machine learning. That's most of the tech headlines these days are being hijacked by this topic. So the lean startup was born in the mobile social world. It survived the cloud era. How do you think it'll adapt itself to the AI era?
Just ask ChatGPT. I'm sure it'll tell you. There's actually a really good lean startup bot in the GPT store. People can go ask it all your lean startup questions. I'm sure it would be able to answer this one. It's a remarkable thing. Look, I don't think we can make too much sure. I don't think we can have too much certainty in our predictions here. I mean, this is a very, but between the time we record this and the time it airs, who knows what incredible new models and capabilities are going to be rolling out. And it's just a remarkable time to be alive. It's a remarkable time just to be a citizen of the world. And, if you care at all about technology, what a cool revolution to live through. But what an exciting time to be an entrepreneur in particular, to be at the dawn of the rise of will probably be multiple mega platforms that dwarf anything we've seen in recent years. So I think it's going to be really exciting. But I have noticed, it's interesting. You asked me about lean startup in the context of an existing company, and I'm a big believer that entrepreneurship is fundamentally about building something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. Doesn't really matter what kind of business card you have. I don't care how big your company is. I don't care how established you are. If you face uncertainty, if you're trying to do something new, you're an entrepreneur. Big company, small company, venture-backed company, small business, bootstrapped in your garage. None of that stuff matters. Those are surface characteristics that don't matter. The deep thing we all have in common, we're trying to build something new in the face of this uncertainty. So the interesting thing about entrepreneurship in the age of AI is you're seeing a lot of companies make the same mistakes we used to make a few years ago. I know a lot of corporate entrepreneurship, corporate innovation programs that have been shut down and replaced with corporate AI programs, and the corporate AI programs, they look like old school waterfall development. I was just talking to an enterprise that, they spent 18 months on model development. They trained a new model that was going to improve, their sales reps and customer service reps productivity. They collected all the requirements. They gathered all the data. They built the model. They spent a lot of money on this. Their data science team worked really hard. They deployed the model internally, and the reps wouldn't use it. And they're like, but the model has such great benchmark scores. And the rep's like, yeah, but I don't like using it. It's not good. And he's like, no, it's good. Show you the benchmark. The benchmark shows that it's good. It's like, look, they're not using it. The fact is, they're not getting the usage. If the reps won't use it, I don't care how good your model is. We're not going to get any productivity benefit out of it. And how many companies have you seen of recent years with a awesome whiz bang demo that lets them raise a lot of venture capital? And then you're like, hey, did anyone actually deploy that thing? Is it running in production? Can I use it today? It's actually good for anything. Like, the actual number of successful generative AI products that have been successfully shipped to production is actually shockingly small, considering the amount of investment, the number of startups, the number of cool demos. The ratio of demos to production is alarmingly high. But it's not alarming if you remember the early days of the web. It's not alarming if you remember the early days of Web 2.0, for those who remember that, the early days of social media. The attrition rate of companies was unbelievable at the start of those waves, because we were not applying lean startup to it. We were running these experiments that were much too expensive and had just assumed deep in their bones that they knew what customers wanted, when they were in fact wrong. So it's been really interesting to see us kind of remaking those same mistakes. And I think for AI companies, more than ever, we need to remember that at the end of the day, we are shipping a product to an end customer, and having a really rigorous scientific approach to understanding that is a major competitive advantage. The irony is not lost on me that many of the people building these models are PhD level scientists. So if they didn't understand the scientific method, they wouldn't be able to do the research. But there's something about our educational system, or I don't know what the reason is. We often see scientists, when they go out of the lab and go into business, they become astrologers and forget the science part. So we gotta not remake that mistake in this era too.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Well said. So let me switch gears. So the methodology has stood its test of time, and I think we've used it in both startups as well as in larger companies where uncertainty, and you're trying to build something new of value in an uncertain environment. Um, what how are you thinking about not just starting a journey with the concept of lean startups, but building enduring value? How do you build something generational that can last for decades using the framework?
Yeah, it's really interesting. This, of course, has been a lot more of my work in recent years. Having built the long-term stock exchange and other projects that are focused on making sure that the companies we start end up worthy of the energy and the passion and the vision that we inject into them. And frankly, I've been disappointed. I've helped so many companies have so much success. I personally I have many friends who have become extraordinarily wealthy and have built companies and taken them public and had a lot of success. And I'm proud of my work with those companies. I'm proud of what my friends have accomplished. But I've also seen the dark side of it, which is that a lot of these companies lose their soul as they scale up and they become untrustworthy. And I think it's really sad. I think in a lot of cases, the compromises that we're forcing companies to make in order to grow are not necessary. In fact, in some ways, they're a liability. I can tell you lots of stories of companies that sowed the seeds of their own destruction by doing things that everyone lauded as good governance and good as a good project. And so we've kind of lost in our society like a bit of the ethos of the value of long-term thinking, the difference between really creating new value and just exploiting an opportunity that you inherited. And so we have built these companies where, as a matter of their governance, they're required to maximize short-term profits over everything else. They get into this exploitative bureaucratic mode that creates liabilities. I always tell people, every time you make one of these exploitative decisions in your company, a startup somewhere is high-fiving, because you just created the opportunity for yourself to be disrupted. If you never do that, there's no surface area to be attacked. You cannot be disrupted unless you create the lack of trust that creates an opportunity for a competitor to come in and take share from you. So I think we're part of this new generation of founders, frankly. Like there's like a movement for change that reminds me a lot of the early days of the lean startup movement. We have people who are really trying to figure out how do I live up to the creed that I'm actually unironically, optimistically, I'm going to build this company to make the world a better place. And I think when we put that at the center, what we discover is that our whole notion of what it means to be a for-profit company needs to be updated. Today, people think if you get success by making money, then you're a success. It's to be lauded. That's what it means to be for profit. But it's not true. And I find it really, when I'm talking to a founder, they'll often say something like, well, my goal is to make as much money as possible for my investors. And I was like, really? I can prove to you that that's not true. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, because I want to achieve my mission. And when I achieve my mission, that makes a lot of money. I said, yeah, but that's subtly different than what you were saying. You said a second ago that you're willing to do whatever it takes to make money, but would you defraud somebody to make money? Would you cheat your customers? Would you do something? And of course, I would never do. I give you a list of like 20 things I would never do to make money. So it's like, okay, so you won't do whatever it takes. There is a limit. What is that limit? And when you really unpack it, for most founders, what they really mean to say is, I have created a business model that connects my mission and corporate purpose to the growth and change that I want to see in the world. And the more we accomplish this outcome for our customers, I was just talking to a company, amazing company, that the product, when customers use their product, it actually improves their mental health. So they are trying to make money. When they make money, they're helping people be happier, be their best selves. So there's an intrinsic connection between making money and achieving the mission that they have to help all these people. And so when we set that linkage up, then there's only certain kinds of making money that are actually laudatory. And I think we actually should redefine what it means to be a for-profit company, to say that if you're a for-profit company, your objective is to maximize human flourishing in the world. We still want to maintain that maximization element of the old model of capitalism. But I think there's something new to be built here, to say that actually these are the companies that are going to outcompete and win in the future, because they ultimately are the ones that investors, customers, suppliers, vendors, their distribution partners, they're the companies you can trust. And I think, in general, we have underrated trust as a corporate asset. So I'm pretty excited about these new founders that are blazing a trail here. It's going to be, I think the next couple of years is going to be really exciting.
Eric, there are great words for the next generation of entrepreneurs. Hopefully, we find the next wave of startups coming embrace those principles that you just laid out. It was wonderful having you, Eric. Thank you for your words of wisdom for our wonderful participants in our Deploy conference, many of whom are entrepreneurs. Certainly, almost all of them are developers, and I'm sure they found a lot of useful advice in our conversation. So, thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I appreciate the kind words. And yeah, thanks to everybody who tuned in to join the conference, and can't wait to see what you build next.